Thank you for joining us here at 8 o'clock. This is Live 5 News. I'm meteorologist Dorien. We're going to switch over here because we do want to give you a first alert update in terms of what's going on in the tropics. We have been tracking now formed tropical storm Debby, at least going into the last several hours, officially designated as of the 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. But let's jump right into it and take a look at tropical storm Debby now, formerly new, of course, at least a couple hours ago. And you do see that circulation is become better organized, especially away from the Cuban coast. Now, this has had a lot of land interaction, at least over the last several days, but you do see that system eventually pulling to the north and eventually the north-northeast as we go into the next day or two. That's going to be very important. And now that we do have a very consolidated area of low pressure, that's going to be very important as well in terms of determining the exact track of this system. But let's take a look at the update. Going to the 8 o'clock advisory, we do get intermediate updates just because of the positioning of this system, and they'll continue to update this as long as we do have tropical storm watches and even hurricane watches and warnings, which we'll get to in just a moment. But as I mentioned before, those winds are still sustained at 40 miles per hour. You could see some higher gusts, especially over the next 24 and 36 hours, especially as this tracks closer to the Florida coastline. And do note, from the 5 o'clock advisory, this remains unchanged. We could actually see a low-end hurricane making landfall in the Big Bend of Florida. Those models are in very strong agreement at this time, and this will eventually slow down beyond the Monday afternoon time frame. And very significantly so, you do see here on the cone of uncertainty still days of rainfall and days of impacts that we could be tracking as far south as Florida, but as far north as the Carolinas. And it's not just the cone that can see those impacts. We could be tracking those much further north and maybe even a little further west, depending on the overall ambient environment. But those winds either way are still going to reach tropical storm force. We do see that on Thursday, possibly at 60 miles per hour. But again, that's going to be very dependent on where this area of low pressure eventually tracks. If it's inland, it could still be a tropical depression. If it moves away from the coastline, we could actually be tracking this as a high-end tropical storm, especially with those warmer waters there along the Gulf Stream and overall in the Atlantic basin. But let's take a look at the future tracker. Going into our Sunday and Monday, we still have rain chances as well, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the center of circulation of Debby is still off the coastline of Florida. We do have that onshore component eventually moving into places like Tampa. And notice our rain chances actually will start on Monday. That is technically a part of this tropical system, and we'll maintain that onshore flow as we go into the beginning of the week. But notice where the center of circulation is as we go into our Monday evening, Monday night. It is moving inland across portions of southeast Georgia by the time you're waking up on Tuesday morning. But we still have plenty of rainfall to go, and it will be very consolidated as it gets closer to our area, especially for Tuesday and Wednesday. There is still the possibility that this system reemerges there across the Atlantic Ocean. The model that I am showing you is the European solution, finally becoming in better agreement again with our global model. We call that the GFS model. And either way, we are still tracking several days of that slow-moving nature, but we are also tracking the heavy rainfall, which of course is going to be in the outer rain bands, but also tracking what happens very close to that center of circulation. Wednesday, a very similar pattern. This model in particular takes it offshore before it really brings it back inland during the day on Thursday. And either way, still tracking a lot of heavy rainfall. Those rain rates could easily approach 1 to 2 inches per hour, especially where we do have that consolidation closer to the center of circulation. But let's talk about the top 3 impacts, because rainfall actually is becoming a bigger threat than the wind and even the coastal flooding. Inland, we have picked those totals back up to 3 to 6 inches of rain. And at the coastline, we could easily see a bare minimum of 6 inches of rain. Again, this will be highly dependent on the track of the system. It still is loaded with a lot of moisture and energy coming in from the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So those rainfall totals easily could be well above 10 inches of rain. And I do think a localized maximum above a foot of rain could be possible for a few locations. So it will be very important to watch that, especially in our flood-prone areas, low-lying areas. We do want to give you the first alert to start your preparations now. But we're going to take a look at the wind as well, because it certainly, if it moves offshore, could be a little bit stronger than the gusts that we see here. Generalized gusts between 40 miles per hour inland, maybe getting close to 55 and 60 miles per hour once we get closer to the coastline, especially there downtown Charleston, any of our beaches. We'll be watching that more so with an onshore component as well. And that's why we also are tracking the risk for some minor to moderate flood stage that could be reached with each high tide cycle. We'll have more information about that as we go into the next couple of days, but do plan for there to be some coastal inundation associated with this system and maybe even some coastal erosion that we are seeing some local governments start to make those preparations for as well. But we do want to jump into what's going on right now because we did get some reports there of flash flooding, especially up towards Clarendon and Orangeburg County with that complex moving out of the Midlands. We did previously have a severe thunderstorm watch just outside of our viewing area. And you do see where all of the heavy rainfall is now. We do have the bulk of that centered over Clarendon County, moving into Manning at this time, and then tracking back towards Orangeburg County where we do have a flood advisory. This will be allowed to expire at 9 o'clock. This actually includes Calhoun as well if you're viewing from the Midlands. But either way, we are still tracking several more hours of heavy rainfall, at least going into the 9 and possibly the 10 o'clock hour as the system eventually begins to weaken moving east. But notice that complex beginning to move into far western portions of Colleton County. This is more so for the Lodge and Smokes area where we did have some very significant rainfall over the past several days. Of course, we do have that elevated risk for a drought, especially over the last week or two. And this rainfall, again, is very beneficial, but it is too much of a good thing at the current rate that it's moving. But do notice as we go into our future tracker, this complex actually will be weakening as it moves closer to the low country within the next couple of hours, much so especially after midnight, moving off the coastline. But notice as we get into the day on Sunday, we actually are tracking some more rainfall, which I do think happens later in the morning into the early afternoon hours. So if you are headed out and maybe even making your preparations, you may have to dodge 1 or 2 areas of rainfall. Some of this could produce lightning and gusty winds. Technically, we do have an outline for a level 1 out of 5 risk for severe weather, but I don't think that necessarily is going to be too big of a factor here ahead of this system. Now, most of Sunday evening, we are dry, and the big story is actually going to turn to the tropics. Tropical storm Debby is still going to be moving closer to our area on Monday and Tuesday. As I mentioned before, we still have a very multifaceted event that could be unfolding here over the next several days. And of course, you can get all of the latest updates on this, plus the ongoing rainfall that we have right now on the Live 5 First Alert Weather app. We'll have the latest up-to-the-minute details and help you to prepare for the rest of this hurricane season, even looking ahead to the next several days. And we do want to note as well that our First Alert Weather days are now extended to include Thursday. So really tracking this system Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday as the system eventually begins to slowly pull away from the low country on Thursday night. But we'll have more updates as well on air. We'll be back here at 11 o'clock and online here at 11:45. And also you can get more information from the city of Charleston. We do have our reporter Caroline Spikes, who actually went out to our presser there with the city of Charleston. We had Mayor Williams Cogswell, as well as the fire and police chief that spoke on how to prepare if you are in downtown Charleston. Now, we'll have more updates, of course, as we go into the next several days as well with our team of meteorologists here at Live 5 News. But reporting right now, I'm meteorologist Dorien. We'll be back here at 11:45. Have a great and safe night.